What we do know going on in the White House, I think about now, is that lunch the president is having with Kamala Harris, the vice president. The reason why this is taking on added intrigue, and they often have lunch together, the rumors that she is sort of the anointed backup, if you will, if the president decides to opt out and not run again for another term. It would be the easiest thing to do because she would instantly inherit all the money that has been raised on the president's behalf, because it's really on the ticket's behalf, and she is part of that ticket as the number 2. So that money, $270 to $75 million, would immediately move to a Harris campaign if that's what happens. Tiana Lowe Doescher, the political correspondent with us, David Carlucci, the former New York State Senator, Democrat. David, what do you make of that? That as far as if you're going to switch horses, she's the one you switch to if you want it seamless money-wise.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense at first blush. You get all of the successes of the Biden-Harris administration, but you don't have the issue of the mental capacity that Biden is facing right now. But I think there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered. I think the bottom line here is that even under all of this turmoil that you see, and over the past year, going through the Democratic primary system, you see that Democrats are in lockstep behind Joe Biden, and really in an effort to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't return to the White House. And that's the blessing I think that Democrats have, that yes, Democrats support Joe Biden because of his record. He's not just talk the talk, he's walk the walk. And I think whatever happens here, you know, we have a month, and if Biden does decide to step aside, that the Democrats will support whoever that candidate is and gives an opportunity to reach towards the middle, something that Donald Trump has not been able to do, even with all of these opportunities, reach across the aisle and a little bit into the middle of these voters that are still on the sideline. That's where this battle is going to be won. And I think that's what's got to be on everyone's mind. Forget about the money. I mean, $1 billion being spent. I don't think it moves the needle that much. It's about these few people in the middle.
All right. You know, it might be a matter, though, Tiana, too little too late, right? I mean, it's like they're rearranging the deck chairs of the Titanic. I don't mean to besmirch the Biden campaign, but it has been imploding since this debate. Now, he could right that ship, again, to keep pushing the Titanic line. But I don't know. The history isn't favorable, whether you're looking at Democrats divided in 1980 with the Ted Kennedy challenge to Jimmy Carter. That ticket went down to defeat. You could look at 1976 with the Republicans incumbent Gerald Ford fighting off a pretty strong challenge from Ronald Reagan. Didn't survive the election that fall with Jimmy Carter. So I grant you, and I know that. But Tiana, to you, are Republicans looking to that and salivating, or are they getting ahead of themselves? Are they getting too excited?
Obviously, no one wants to get too cocky because we're still a very divided electorate. But David's right about really one thing. Democrats have exactly 1 month, right? The Ohio deadline to put a Democratic presidential candidate on the ballot is August 7th. So we have 1 month and 4 days, and that's it. Obviously, there's the big issue of the money, a $250 million war chest that can only go to Kamala Harris if Joe Biden drops out. And that's even if he wants to drop out. In either case, it works out great for Trump because right now Trump is leading in that latest CNN post-debate poll. He's 6 points ahead of Joe Biden nationally. You have another CBS poll that shows in battleground states he has at least a 3-point margin. All of this significantly better than Trump ever did against Joe Biden in 2020. Kamala Harris is almost as unpopular as Joe Biden is, right? Joe Biden is approaching that like negative net 20 approval rating. Kamala Harris is still in the net negative double digits. And also, this is before the focus has been on her with a bunch of Oppo research. And we know what she's like under the national spotlight because we saw her crumble before she had to drop out before Iowa in the 2020 Democratic primary. The biggest thing of all is the fact that you still have to defend this record. And the fact is the White House record isn't good. The age thing and the fact that Biden could get away with using a teleprompter to answer interview questions all this year, it's just a symptom of the problem, which is that there is no leadership.
All right. Well, obviously, strong opinions here. The economic record, I mean, I just look at the numbers. It's not awful. I mean, you know, we have seen steady economic number growth, jobs improving, retail sales looking pretty strong, packed airplanes, packed hotels. So that is some of the noise going on here. But you're right to point out, Tiana, that it isn't benefiting the president. So I'm wondering what changes, David, if he stays in the race.
Well, I think it's about making that case. Look, some of the early polling since Thursday's debate are out. And yes, it shows Trump just slightly ahead of Joe Biden. But according to all the things that we're talking about, you would imagine that Donald Trump would be way ahead. He's not. So even if Joe Biden stays in this race, which the jury's still out on that, it'll be very interesting to see that if he can move that debate closer towards the middle. And I think you talk about the S&P, I mean, the index. If we just started when Joe Biden started, we have a 40% increase. You look at the stock market. You guys cover it extensively every day. It's been on the rise. The economy is heating. And yes, it's easy to poke holes and attack sectors. But the biggest problem with the economy is people are being left behind. And that's attributed to the massive tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans. That was Donald Trump's legacy. And
really?
Are you?
Come on. Now, David, are you still using that buzzsaw? I mean, come on. You don't attribute any of this problem to the present occupant of the White House?
What problem?
What is it with you guys? Everything is everyone else's fault.
The divide. The problem of having record low unemployment rate, having a record high stock market. What is the problem?
It gets a little extreme there, Tiana.
It's because the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer.
But please, let's not go back in ancient history. Tiana, by the same token, I wonder if Donald Trump should be salivating at this when the guy he could beat on paper, might be very different if it's a different guy, if it's a different delegate. What if it's the vice president? Then everything changes, and then they might have been too zealous to get rid of Joe Biden and face an even more divisive and a problematic foe. What do you think?
I mean, it's why you should expect the Republican Party to start filing legal challenges if they do try and move Joe Biden off the ballot, and especially if they try and replace him with someone other than Kamala Harris, right? Because legally, since they are a ticket, they are more combined. And Joe Biden has 99% of the delegates, right? It's very difficult to rob the voters of that choice.
Wait a minute, Tina. Are you saying that Republicans will likely file a lawsuit then if it isn't Kamala Harris because she's part of a ticket? I mean, an open convention would be an open convention.
But the delegates are already theoretically committed, right? You have 99% of delegates that have already voted in favor of the
Not if the guy who has all of those delegates quits.
Right, he can release those delegates.
If he quits, if they can find a miracle consensus candidate, that's one thing. But if you try and leapfrog the first female, Black, and Asian vice president in history, if you try and leapfrog her with Pete Buttigieg or Gretchen Whitmer, it blows up the intersectional coalition.
David, what do you make about that? I have heard this expressed in the past that it's easier said than done going to someone other than Kamala. Now, I know you don't see it happening that the president steps down, but if that were to happen, then what?
Regardless, I think if you have an open convention where Biden does release his delegates, it could be messy, it could get ugly, but at the end of the day, come that deadline, you're going to have Democrats united. And that's the bottom line. I think
you
that's
really think
the thing that's most important here.
What they're doing right now? They're turning on each other. They're like me at a buffet. They're climbing over each other to get to the prime rib.
No, because it's about beating Donald Trump. And unfortunately, in this day and age, most people vote against rather than for. And that's where we are in this middle ground, where people have not decided yet. It's going to be about, right now, the distraction is on Joe Biden. It's not
David,
on Donald
I'm telling you, I talked to a lot of your colleagues and friends. They are frantic. They don't know what to make of this.
They're concerned, yes.
More than concerned.
But the Republicans have an even bigger
problem.
Also, they focus all their energy on Joe Biden and his mental acuity. If that's out of the picture, what happens? I think that's a very troubling scenario.
All right, Tiana, final word.
If that's out of the picture, the first real inflationary cycle that the majority of the electorate has experienced, right? A 20% increase in overall prices since Biden took office, 40% increase in energy costs. This is something that young voters under 50 have never really lived through, this kind of inflation. They lived through that, and they decided that it's terrible. It doesn't matter if their 401ks are doing well. It doesn't matter if your neighbor doesn't lose your job.
What Donald Trump is going to do. They're going to listen closely to what Donald Trump is going to do, and he has said absolutely nothing except
But they already lived under his
retribution. No, and once they understand,
guys, we're going to feel from what I asked. If we could, there'll be a homework assignment next time you join me. Stick to the subject. You were both great. I enjoyed you, so I appreciate that.